And so, like heavenly angels, on wings of gossamer and lasers, so did they descend to say, "Hi, welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, your other host and my host companion, Sejohn Sarowik. Sejohn?
So are these like structural lasers? Like I'm confused with the setup here. Like
What?
what is the how is this physically working? Gossamer is a fabric, right?
No, gossamer is technically yes, silk as we know it is made of gossamer. Gossamer
Mm.
is like the fine threads that bugs create.
Okay.
Yeah. And lasers are lasers. Light amplification,
Man, I
something.
love that we are a science podcast.
Well,
Lasers are lasers. That might be the best quote of the year so far. Oh
oh
man.
man, I don't know what to tell you, man. We're here. I'm excited to be here today. That gossamer and lasers, it'll all make sense when we get to the task portion of the show. I'm a little upset, Sejohn, that the strikes are going on because I'm a bit of an idiot. Literally, all I've been doing is watching films, and I can't talk about them. And then last night, I also binged through a television show, and I wouldn't mind discussing that either. But we're stuck here in solidarity, and I'm not upset about it. It is. I mean, I don't know if you saw the offer that the writers got this week.
I did not. I was not aware they had received an offer. I had seen a lot of stuff about. There's been a lot more from like Fran Drescher and some higher ups, really trying to make sure. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this because it's not like they're on damage control or anything. Right now, they're still coming out smelling like roses from this whole thing. But there's this idea that I think they're really trying to make sure that people realize that what they're doing here is really something that's important across the board for everybody, right? And I think those are kind of the exact words that like Fran Drescher herself was using this week, just trying to really get out there and really talk about the ways in which this strike really is something that is emblematic of something that they feel this whole country needs to be doing right now, in terms of demanding fair wages for yourself and all this stuff, and fair compensation and safe environments to work and all that. And I think it's really interesting because there have been a couple of strikes that we have actually heard about outside of this one that have one that's come and gone already, and another that's on its possibly on its way, with the UPS drivers getting a lot of what they asked for. And that being really cool that has been resolved and stuff. It's been really interesting to see the ways in which people representing the writers and the actors have really wanted to make it a point to make sure that people are aware that this isn't just, this isn't George Clooney sitting around wanting $10 million extra for his next movie. Like, that's not what this is. This is like the hundreds of thousands of people that you don't ever hear about that are struggling to get by in the industry. And just like every industry, right, is there's a couple of people that rise to the top that we think of, but we forget that there's for every Elon Musk, there's 300,000 workers behind him that really are the ones getting the work done. It's interesting because it does feel almost like it's like pre-damage control. Like they're really trying to make sure that studios can't get out there and start really burning them in the public eye, which is smart. Like it's a smart move. But I'm interested. It's interesting to see how they've really ramped that up over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. So what I saw from the Writers Guild and what they were offered was about a 43% increase in what they were getting paid currently. But what it did not address was the required staffing numbers that they want. And basically, AI is a thing, so you guys got to get used to it. But the fact that what the studios offered really makes it look like these people have some power. The fact that they did reject it, I understand why. When it's like, yeah, you can have up to 2 people who are your writing shadows who are training to be showrunners, but then the rest of it's going to be AI.
Yeah.
That doesn't really work because the other issue we're trying to avoid is the AI of it all, which you sent me something frankly just terrifying regarding
Yeah,
AI
no.
this morning. So.
Yeah, I don't know how deep we can get into it without having to address specific shows and stuff, right? But let me put it this way. The title of it talks about animation across the board, basically being kind of being able to put the hands of an animated show, putting AI right like into the room. It's not as hard as you would believe. In fact, there's entire shows right now that are kind of being manufactured in that way. You know, we talked about some stuff in the past with the ways in which you know, like Chat GPT was running some shows sometimes, and how they had to kind of step in and put a stop to it because some people, you know, got in and fucked around with the algorithm, and man, when we can finally talk about some of this stuff again, there's just some really wild examples of things that have come out. But yeah, I mean, the AI thing it's so interesting how much the studios don't want to budge on that, like in any fashion. Not even being like, well, okay, like our top tier shows are gonna have AI, that's just gonna happen, but we'll give you your artsy, you know, one-offs, right? Like you like, it's wild to me that there's not even a chance of a discussion. Like that seems ridiculous to me because like the entertainment industry is so uniquely positioned to do things like, you know, like preserve a space for artists. It's like, you know what I mean? Like
I
there
know
isn't going to
exactly what
be
you mean. Yeah.
right, yeah. There's not going to be like a boutique industry within tech, like sub industry within tech that people will always promise to guarantee AI won't be involved. That's just not going to happen in the tech industry. There's always going to be that risk of AI being involved. And no matter what kind of contracts we want in place, we might be able to preserve jobs in various ways. But one thing you're never going to be able to do is keep computers out of the room. That's just not how that industry works, right? Entertainment is not that cut and dry. There is so much room for the entertainment industry to still say, like, we have a threshold. We have a moment at which we won't let AI be involved because we want to preserve something, whether that's the integrity of the art, whatever, you know, people's livelihoods, whatever conversation you want to have, whatever words you want to put on it. Like, there is no industry in a better position to do that kind of caveat than the entertainment industry. And it's just fucking weird that there's just nobody on the other side of the aisle even talking about that. It really does highlight how, and it's always been this way, but something that we've talked about, that feeling of how brazen the capitalist company side of this entire system has really gotten in the last 20, 30, 50 years, you know? Like, it's wild how kind of they just don't seem to care. Like, even from what audiences are saying, because that's the other wild thing about all of this, is I wasn't kidding when I said that the actors and the writers are coming out smelling like roses on this whole thing. There hasn't been a single move by the studio that has been seen in a good light, right? And there's not been a single non-move, like anything that they refuse to talk about. They just look worse and worse and worse and worse. I don't know anybody out there like who is on the side of the companies here completely, and that's just wild to me as well. Like, very often in these political times, right, you can always find somebody out there that's going to give you the hot take, but there's nobody even daring to do that right now. They're wanting to do that. Like, it's not even like they feel like they can't talk about it. I don't know anybody out there that thinks that they should. I don't know. It's such a, like, there's such a clear-cut line of the heroes and villains in this story, right? It's crazy to me that there's these people that are just so willing to be the villain this time around.
It's strange. I mean, there are definitely voices out there. I do try to make sure that I immerse myself in both sides of it. And the other side of it, the people who are kind of on the side, and I say kind of on the side, like, they're not 100% like, oh my God, I'm behind the corporations on this one. But there does seem to be, this is what happens with corporations. Like, everybody is out of work. Everybody is getting paid less. Like, these arguments that are made, and it's just like, that's the way that capitalism works. And it's like, that's the problem. Like,
right,
these
and
people
that
are like,
kind of goes to what I was saying earlier and what Fran Drescher was addressing this week, and other voices out there that have been like, this isn't just our industry, right? Like in a weird way, I guess I'm not counting those voices as like counter to, because they are buying into the exact bigger issue, right? Is like, yeah, this is a problem across the board with jobs, right? And it just so happens that this industry hit a a boiling point faster than some other ones. But like there should be some other industries that are doing this. They're all industries should be reevaluating. It's that thing where like you said really early on something really interesting to me. Like there's this theory, there's this not theory, this is fact, that there's this idea that contracts were kind of created and settled really early on, and then they haven't been touched for 20 years. Like this, people have been getting the same kind of contracts and the same kinds of deals for 2 decades now, and that's insane. Because look at the way that the entertainment industry has changed just in the last 20 years, with streaming alone being a huge part of it, but now also AI and stuff. But there's so many other factors too. The idea that like we've gone through the golden age of television, and that idea that TV is not just the dumping ground for talent anymore, that you can't seem to get to work on the big screen, like that's just not true anymore either, right? And reality TV has blown up, and now like it is still the cheapest thing to produce, so it's not going anywhere, but it's also still not the cash cow that it used to be, right? Like there's all of this stuff that has changed, and the idea that nothing has been retooled or reevaluated in the last 2 decades is crazy. And then you think about that across the fucking board. There isn't an industry out there that's really gone through a shift in worker like employer like relations in it. Like nobody has reevaluated that entire situation in any industry for decades. And it's part of that is because we had a really what's the word I'm going to look for? Not lazy, but there was
Complacent. We grew
an
complacent.
apathetic generation or two that kind of came through. Part of that was because of promises made to us that turned out to not be true. Part of that is also just because like there was a lot of people in our generation, the generation before us, that were just kind of ignorant to like how bad people were willing to be. Like so there's some generational blame to go around there for sure, but also at the end of the day, like I just don't know if anybody ever thought some people would be willing to go as far as they've gone in trying to immerse some small modicum of power in the few decades that they're on this earth. It's just wild, man. I can't believe, like I said earlier, how willing some people are these days to just be the villain. And I don't understand what they're hoping to gain, because like we talk about this stuff with like AI is going to be in the room, except we've proven time and time again that AI models are still a work in progress. The promises that they've made are not going to come to like they're never going to come to true fruition, right? It's like the same idea with like we've talked about this in all forms of technology. A lot of big promises get made really early on, and then like they kind of just peter out and they get worked into everyday life in some ways. But I mean, like AI is just not going to be able to replace a room full of 30 writers in perpetuity. It might be able to do it for a season, might be able to do it for a show or two, but at some point audiences are going to start kind of not wanting that kind of material. Those programs are not always going to work the way that they expect them to. I mean, we've seen a couple of AI models that have gotten, in the eyes of their audiences, cut off at the knees just because of things like, we don't want this thing to be racist or sexist. Now, I don't necessarily, I think that kind of shit needs to be getting done, right? Like AI models need to be getting taught, but people have been noticing that by going in and changing certain aspects in that regard, you are then putting, the second you put any type of constraints on an AI algorithm model, it starts to affect all answers. So even if it is with that well-intentioned, well-meaning effect of not wanting it to be racist anymore, right? Like the most obvious thing in the world that you would want your AI, you would want to teach your AI to be sensitive to that sort of stuff, right? The second that you introduce anything like that, though, you end up with a whole ripple effect of what it is willing to talk about or how it talks about anything and everything, right? And then, there's the other side of that coin of where it's not necessarily so much a moralistic thing, but a legal thing, where we now have a bunch of AI models that are now getting kind of truncated here and there and walled off in certain places because people have started to realize that they've been learning on books that other people wrote. And if you type into certain versions of ChatGPT or any of the other ones, like if you type into it, like not necessarily, so if you type in, how did this phrase go? If you type in, tell me the story of Harry Potter, it'll come up and say, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Like, for more information on Harry Potter, you can go to these places, and this is the basics of it, but I can't go beyond that because you need to learn from the source, right? That's the general gist of what it says. However, if you tell it to tell you a story like Harry Potter about a young boy in this situation, and if you give it just the right prompt, it'll just pop out the 7 books of Harry Potter, right? And it's that idea of like, how do we get it to stop doing that? Well, we have to start telling it can't do this or it shouldn't do that, and this, and this. And again, that ripple effect of that AI model just breaking down and not being able to be as creative as it once was, to not be able to be as correct as it once was. Like, there's all of these things that people are starting to figure out or still figuring out. And this idea that this entire industry is the companies and this conversation about like writers and actors think that they're just going to just be okay just kicking everybody out the door. Like, again, short term maybe, but 2-3 years, like, we could be looking at a completely different environment for AI, and it could be like what happened with VR, where just nobody's talking about it anymore. It's still out there and people still do stuff for it and it's fun, but it's so niche and people couldn't really figure out what to do with it, so it's just kind of existing again, right?
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. When I say the people that I brought up, to go back to what kicked this whole discussion off, that's what I'm saying is like the only people who are countering it. Because that's really the only counter that you can make, is like, this is how the economy has worked in the past. But again, that's the problem. You can't become complacent because it's how it's worked in the past.
Right.
And then everything else that you're discussing, like, yeah, as much as we don't want our AIs to be racist or sexist or all of those other things that are negative, it's definitely a negative thing that grows by just cutting it off at the knees, essentially euthanizing it when it starts to have those ideas that, like, this is what I should be producing. You're not allowing it to learn past it, right? And this is something that I've talked about before. I've discussed this a bunch of times before. You look at the history of humans on the planet Earth, they all have those moments. And then we learn and grow past them. I mean, yes, there are still some people who are racist and sexist and represent that type of ignorance. But, like, an AI, the way that it's supposed to act, right? The way that it, like, this artificial intelligence, like, one day the singularity, which I don't want that to happen. I'm just saying, like, if that's what we're discussing, right, is that it needs to be able to learn past that, and telling it not to do that just seems like the wrong way.
It's an interesting conversation, right? Because, like, not to blow everybody's mind, but now we're starting to talk about just like the simple, concepts of like human learning, right? Because that's the problem, is that we are so focused on how we're teaching the machines to do A, B, and C. And the thing is like, we haven't figured this fucking shit out for ourselves yet first, right? And I think that's the bigger thing, is that I don't know if there's anybody out there saying that we need to stop developing AI. Sure, there are some people. There are definitely people out there that think we should stop creating AI. I mean, as far as in this conversation, for people that recognize like advancements of technology and progress and all of that, there are people out there that want to explore AI, but do it at a much slower pace. So when they're doing things like, hey, for this version of, like, we're gonna teach it, to just kind of just cut this shit out for right now, that doesn't stop them from going back and figuring out how to retool and fix and really nuance a lot more of these conversations. And as long as we're still doing that, that's fine. But we don't jump into this fucking half-baked cake right, and just start eating. Like we're still learning how to teach it how to do these things right? Like, come back in 10 years, and then maybe we can have a much more nuanced conversation about what AI is actually capable of in these contract negotiations that have real human lives connected to them. Like, it's just wild that we are, that not we, that there are people in this conversation that are just so ready to just throw human lives away for computer programming that we still don't even know how it's gonna really work.
Yeah, that's the problem is it comes from both sides, and that is just the truest statement about it. Because in 2007, the reason that the writers really went on strike was because you are not considering what streaming will do to this entire industry, and we want to make sure that we are going to be getting proper residuals from streaming, right? That's the whole reason that the industry ground to a halt 16 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the solutions that they came up with were not great, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't be striking right now.
Into account, right, nor did they know. I mean, like, streaming is a great example of something to look at, right? The ways and the promises, the ways that streaming were going to change the industry, and the promises that were made about streaming services 10 years ago, when they were 15 years ago at this point, right? When they were going through this strike, right? That conversation then had no idea what we'd be looking at now, and look at what's going on now. People are now fucking sick of streaming, and the ways in which they're now paying for 6 different services, and basically paying more than they were when they were paying a cable company one service. And it sucked because it was their only choice in the area, but at least it was just one bill and it was less than what they're paying now. Like, this idea that like streaming has really fallen on its face right now. I'm not saying it's going away, I'm not saying that it's dead in the water, anything like that. Streaming is pretty much here to stay, but the ways in which streaming was like the promised savior for the customer has not come to fruition. It's just not. And the ways in which streaming was supposed to be this great place for artists to be able to express themselves because they weren't going to be constrained by ad breaks and episode lengths and all this other shit that you were getting with TV, or even going to a theater experience, all of that has pretty much gone out the fucking window. Like, that's just not happened. Things have not changed in the ways that we were told they were going to, from a customer standpoint or from a creator's standpoint. Like, the only people that have really come out on top on all of this is, lo and behold, the companies, right? Which really speaks to what you're saying about how those contracts were just really never well written. But a part of the reason why is because they were written on the hopes and dreams of what streaming might be one day, and that's just not what it became. Now apply that same fucking thing to AI, right? Like, that's exactly what's going to happen with AI. It's not that it's going to go away. It's not that it won't be used in 10 years. But what we think it's going to be doing in 10 years, we don't know. We have no idea. And again, these people that are willing to bet their entire industry on AI are just, like, insane to me. Like, they're just not seeing the forest for the trees.
Exactly. But so they want to make sure that the streaming is better. They want to make sure that what we're fighting for, we don't have the wool pulled over our eyes the way that we did this time around. But also, since we're here, we also want to future-proof ourselves against AI. We can't just take a deal and then say we'll deal with it later on down the line anymore. Because that's one of the things that happened in 2007. Like you said, we need to end this and go with what we know now, not try to think of what the future will hold. They are thinking of what the future will hold because they have to, because now they know that if they don't stop now and try to get the rights that they need, then they're going to be taken advantage of, and there's going to be another strike further on down the line. And at that point, will we have the power, right? Or will the AI actually be able to replace us? And it doesn't matter if it's only replacing them, like, briefly, right? Enough for them to not have jobs anymore. And if people are willing to consume that, right, what AI has, even for just a couple of years, then it can completely restructure what the business looks like. And what it means for writers in Hollywood, their expectations of what they can get. So, I mean, it's such a weird strike because we have quantifiable evidence of the last time that they sort of compromised in a way that, like, wasn't future-proofing their contract. We also see like that there's just so much going on with this. And the fact that they actually have the solidarity of the Screen Actors Guild, like SAG-AFTRA, like also striking at this time, like this is the time to enact that big change. And it's crazy. But to go back to what we were talking before about what AI can do, we never really talked about it here, but there was that crossover YouTube video that was Five Nights at Freddy's with Scooby-Doo. It's a YouTube video, and if it leads it to that. But it's an important thing to discuss because that creator, and it's like a young kid, I think he was like 18, maybe 19, doing it just for his portfolio. He used AI voices for every character except for Shaggy and Scooby. And that erupted into a huge controversy because I don't think these voice actors realized beforehand just how easy it was to recreate their voices.
Well, and that's been something that's a conversation that's been going on for a bit here. I mean, even going back to conversations we've had on the show about things like deepfakes and stuff, right? Like this ways in which people weren't, when people were putting the voices and their images out there for all sorts of reasons, whether it was because they were entertainers or maybe they were somebody that, like even if they were just seeing themselves as like educators and stuff like that, right? Like this idea that people put themselves out there, and now with the amount of shit out there from some people, like we got their likeness, we've got their voice, their vocal patterns, we've even got in some ways an understanding of how they at least present themselves to behave mentally, emotionally, and all that stuff, right? So that idea being that like we can put together like this entire AI episode of a show from 60 years ago, right? And it be pretty spot on. A couple of garbly bits. I actually watched that whole thing. I've watched that whole thing a couple of times because it's actually super well done. But like the garbly bits that are there, like you go, yep, it's AI. But it doesn't stop you from watching, right? And so that's even like another level to it, is like not only does it capture a lot of what it's trying to capture extremely well in a way that these people never could have guessed, on top of that, like even when it does kind of stumble, is close enough for a lot of people. And I think that's what really set a lot of people off about it, is that it is so obvious that it's AI, but it is also so well done that it's hard in people's heads to comprehend that right now. But that's a whole part of this conversation, right? Is how much kind of jank are you willing to put up with as an audience member to still get something entertaining into your system, to still get that dopamine hit of enjoying your a show or a movie with an actor that maybe has passed away or like maybe doesn't do as much anymore, or maybe a show that was canceled on you. I mean, imagine if they were able to put out a new episode of, say, Firefly, and everybody would just lose their shit, right? Like the AI conversation is not, I don't think that we need to stop having it, right? I think that's going to just be something that people are going to have to discuss for a while. But man, we got to start putting some other options on the table for what AI might become, rather than this just like savior like thing for that the companies want to see it as.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, and also, going back to the jank of the AI that you were just talking about, think about the stuff we were watching in the 80s, and how often there'd be, like, a bad line, or the wrong character would speak with someone else's voice because of like an animation error.
I mean,
like,
just even the very show that we were kind of talking about there, like animation reusing the same cells and character things and just putting new lines over it, and like so mouths not quite lining up, or even straight up like anime does this all the time. Like in order to save money, you do like unmoving. Like they don't move. The shots don't move. The camera maybe just zooms in on eyes or a mouth or something, or so you have 10 to 20 seconds of footage, like quote around footage, which is unmoving animated cells, right? Which is like, you see that a lot back in the old day, right? And people are just like, that's just part of the charm of that style of thing. People are going to find a charm in AI generated material. More on that actually with my homework assignment this today, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But that idea that like we have to come to terms with the fact that AI is going to be involved in the conversation, and so anybody out there that's trying to like completely remove AI is probably not going to win. I'm not going to say whether or not I agree with them. I've got clearly my my own conflicted feelings on the use of AI in the use of creative fields like television and movies and music and all that stuff. But for despite my misgivings about what AI is, I'm not stupid. I know that there are people out there that are just going to find something in it, and they're not gonna want to let it go. And so those people should, be allowed to do what they want to do with that too, because who knows? Maybe they will create some piece of fantastic art down the line that we just cannot deny, right? Because I mean, like, look at the conversation with video games and about how for years people would talk about video games as art, and it was like balked at, right? Until like finally like Roger Ebert himself had to like write a retraction about how he really did not understand where video games were going to be able to go in terms of creating art when he was first kind of being so down on it, right? I think we're going to find that AI has its moment there too, right? Is like at some point we are going to have to admit that there is a thing that's AI created that is kind of fascinating and cool to look at. Like, but that doesn't mean that humans should be removed from everything.
Right. Well, all I know is that I am regretting not covering a certain film last year for its 20th anniversary. I'll just say that, and that'll be enough, because we've already kind of flirted with talking about some things, but it is related to the AI discussion, and there are resources out there. And the last thing about that AI generated episode, from the creator, he did find people who are willing to record the voices so it wouldn't be the AI. I don't think that version is available yet, but it is an interesting, it's a case study of exactly what they're talking about in terms of AI being able to like replace living people.
There's also something to be said that if this is a guy creating stuff for their portfolio, right? If this is a person just out there just putting together a thing that is not intended to make them money or go, they're not monetizing it on like YouTube, as far as I know, and things like that, right? Like if that's not what they're doing with it, then we can't hold them to the same standard, right? Like the idea that it was somebody out there that generated this for a class project, essentially, like we should not have to go out and search out actors to replace the vocal stuff in his shit. Like that's just not, that's a wild. If that is morally what they feel they need to do, then more power to them, and let them kind of work that out. If that's the way that they want to be able to talk about it when they're in a job interview and point to that project and say, yeah, I actually replaced A, B, and C. Like if that's what they want to do, cool. If they're doing it because of pressure from like us, like the world, like don't do that, because this is you created a thing. Like, be proud of the thing you created.
Well, I mean, a lot of that pressure came from the voice actors that were recreated.
Yeah, but again, they didn't lose any money. They weren't going to make money off of a class project. Like that's fair use in classes is something that has been a thing.
We've known that. We've played with that a bunch
in classes because they're learning from them. They sure as hell ain't paying the company to show them. Like that's just that's wild to me. That they felt any pressure from voice actors or whatever.
Well, I think that where it comes from is, like I said, we're looking at it as a case study on the one side, but if the studios got their hands on it, and I'm sure they do, right? They have people who are out there. It's kind of proof of concept for the fact of like, see, we don't need to hire. We can just use this. And I think that's the bigger fear, is the fact that like, you're not exactly Oppenheimer creating the nuclear bomb, but you are engineering something that could have damaging ramifications later on down the line.
Sure.
Like you're not thinking about, I mean, obviously one would hope that it's not the same as the nuclear bomb. I will say that, but it is one of those things where just putting it together for that project, right? And what it's supposed to do is show that you can animate, right? That's the goal with it being like a portfolio piece or a class project. It doesn't necessarily need voices to do that. I know that vocals are part of it. It's such a weird thing.
Know what the parameters were of the project.
Right,
if you needed to be animating around vocal, like then
Yeah, because at the same time, yeah, we want to make sure that you can do sync, that you can make your characters speak with something. So if that student, instead of using an AI, had lifted lines from the show and recreated a scene from the show, but with his stop motion animation, no one would have batted an eye. It is the fact
that I personally would be if this was really like a big deal, like because I do prototyping for the work that I do, right? When I do like the app UI design stuff that I work on now, like I go out and I grab stuff off of Google Images. I go around and I just like search like, oh, I need an image of a guy sitting at a computer so that I can take that computer screen and put like a mock-up of my app on it, right? So like I just Google search for a guy sitting at a computer. I don't go out of my way to like pay Shutterstock for a stock image of a guy sitting at his computer. I don't need to do that because I'm not taking the financial thing away. Like there's no financial gain or loss there because I'm not selling my product. Like I'm putting it into a portfolio to show people. Like at what point do I need to start like going out and finding like again like I need to start like paying a photographer to get a couple of shots of my app on my phone? No, that's not how prototyping works. You just grab some stuff for now, and then if you're ever going to sell that thing, then you do the cleanup work. Like that's just how projects like this go. Like it's crazy to me that somebody would give somebody guff on a project for a portfolio or class. Like that's not the battlefield,
Yeah, I don't know, but I think it becomes the battlefield only because of everything else that's going on around it. Like, I don't think that if people weren't on strike, and one of the big caveats of that is usage of AI to replace workers, then that doesn't become a battlefield.
Is this guy going to have to go out and pay these voice actors that he found to be in his thing now? Because that sucks.
By all accounts, it is people who have...
project.
By all accounts, and when I was following, and this was like weeks ago, and it just didn't come up, but now, with what we've seen, what you showed me this morning that like was terrifying... Like that, to wake up to the link you sent me this morning about AI can just create episodes of television for you, just give it the parameters. Like, that's scary. That was scary to me. And then it made me think of this, where like there was at least some human element to it, because all of the animation was stop motion animation, but it was done by a human. But it is still like the similar implementation of how that program that you showed me is able to have the characters speak like the characters and sound like them. So it is a brave new frontier that we are looking at. And again, I think that if a student just does it in a vacuum, it's fine. It is the surrounding environment that makes it catch fire.
Right, but like I was saying with the work that I do, as an example, we already do that in every other industry. We already allow people learning and people fucking around and amateurs, essentially, to have certain leeway that we don't allow professionals to have. That is just across the board true in every industry. Somebody who is learning, somebody who's apprenticing, somebody who's an amateur, somebody who is not doing it as their main line of work, they are often given kind of carte blanche to experiment and do things in a way that somebody in a much more professional environment is just not allowed to. And like, that is a bridge too far for me. When we start getting in the way of people at home homebrewing some shit, trying to figure out how this stuff works, when we start stopping them from in the privacy of their own like bubble from doing that, that is when we've gone too far, because then, as you were saying earlier on in this conversation, we never get to teach ourselves or teach the program how to evolve and be better. If nobody's allowed to touch it, then how will it ever do it? How will it ever progress?
Yeah. I really want to segue off of evolve and be better, but one last thing, because you did bring up Shutterstock. I was dealing with them last last season, I guess, the last semester of school that I was a part of, because they have a fairly extensive like education caveat where you can use our stuff for educational purposes. It's when you start trying to market and make money off it that we have a problem. And so like you're not wrong. Like even that Shutterstock is the people that you pay for images, right? Like that's why you use it. So when that comes up and I'm told we want to get this poster made, but I don't know if we can, and then I'm like, well, you guys should read all of the use stuff. It's education. It's just for educational purposes. You don't need to pay for it because of that. Like you're using it. You're within the guidelines of using this without having to purchase it. And that's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, with your portfolio, I mean, you're taking courses to learn that stuff. So if it's something you're going to turn in, of course it's fine to use that. Completely the fair use under the education parameters. It's just weird. It's such a weird time. And for that to see what appeared to be, I mean, yes, it was all the human element that had them turn down that deal, that like looking at it, I'm like, this is some pretty significant like changes on behalf of the corporations to make sure that people are fairly compensated for the work that they're doing. But when I look at why would they turn it down, and then I read all the things like, but AI is going to be in the room, I understand why they're like, yeah, you kind of give an AI carte blanche in these contracts. Not sure if we're going to sign that.
I mean, what's crazy is like it really shows their hand in terms of what they actually care about and how much they are actually able to move, right?
Yeah.
Because like they can't say now that that it's like, oh, we don't have the money to be paying you what you're asking for, because they've already offered that, right? Like they've really shown their hand in that regard. And the idea that is what they moved on and not AI really kind of shows where their focus is. Yeah, it's that is wild, and I'm interested to hear what the next offer is. If so is the deal that SAG-AFTRA and all them are going to like counter, or is it up to the studios to come up with a new offer?
So, I mean, WGA, they said we're not going to do it because of it. This is just WGA. I don't know anything about SAG-AFTRA and where they are. I don't believe that. I think that you're right when you say there was no negotiation. I think they're the ones who aren't negotiating right now. It was WGA who are like, well, they're willing to come to the table. Let's hear what they have to say. And their response was, I mean, this is a good start, but we have an issue here. This is what we want instead. We have an issue here. This is what we want instead. Like, so it wasn't like a full-on counter. It was more, these are the things that work. These are the things that need to get better.
Yeah.
So, and that makes sense, because if they just said this is the problems that we have with it, and then they come back and they're like, all right, so it's not a 43% raise off of what you're getting, it's now a 39% raise, but we gave you that other stuff. I don't know about you, but I would then be like, well, you had the money before. Like, I know that we like it's a give and take sort of thing. And if you had come back and increased the money to like, it's a 46% increase and not addressed our other issues, like they also kind of fucked themselves by like, that's the minimum amount of money that the WGA should be looking for right now.
Yeah.
Like there's no reason that the percentage of the raises should go down again. And if they do, it can't be something significant, because the whole thing is you guys are making money hand over fist, even in an industry that like none of it is profitable. The worst part about this conversation we're having right now is I just got hit with all the subscriptions before this recording, and freaking Peacock went up $2. And I know that that's like not a hugely significant amount of money, $2, but
it is a significant amount of money. Like I think that like we that's how they get you, right? Is like there's this idea that if we just do it by like 99 cents at a time, nobody will ever feel like they can say anything. Nah, fuck that. like they raised it by $2. I mean, for some people that is make or break. Like, so
I mean, it's the conversation is the thing about Peacock is, right, it comes out of me and then I get the money from the people around, and I'm like, I saw that and I'm like, what am I using Peacock for? Okay, but what are other people who use Peacock using Peacock for? I don't think that I can just unilaterally cancel this subscription.
Mm-hmm.
Because
It's been a weird conversation in our house because we've been trying to get away from Netflix for a while. Not, like I'm not going to sit here and start Netflix bashing. That's like what everybody gets off on doing online nowadays. But like we just in our rotation of trying to figure out what we do want to have in the house right now and what we don't need right now, Netflix is at the bottom of the list for me, right? However, when we started looking at stuff that everybody else in the house was watching, that was not the case, right? And so it's one of those difficult things right now with, as I've mentioned before, we rotate, right? Like we cancel one so that we can start up another just to kind of keep things going okay in the finances department. And we've hit a really hard moment right now where we can't quite figure out what we're willing to give up in order to bring in something new. It's not easy now because of there being so many different services that have like the big get on them.
Yeah, it also like, so there's that one where I need to consider that and have the discussion, and that person pays the bulk of it already. So I think that they'll be okay considering it's a lot of sports coverage that also comes with Peacock. I feel like I can say that. It's not the other stuff. And yes, we're watching a show there, but I would be all right like canceling it after the next one. I didn't see all of the show when it first aired, right? But then it's also Xbox Game Pass increasing its price as they like sort of lower what you're getting. Like there's no more games with gold, so I'm not getting free games that I own as long as I'm subscribed. It is just going to be like, this is what you have access to in our Game Pass now.
Right.
So I think that this month, post the 9th of September, for something that if I'm going to do it, we'll talk about it next week. Post the 9th of September, I think I'm going to focus up, make sure that I got my money worth for all those months that I was subscribed. I mean, Sea of Stars, I want to play Sea of Stars because I loved The Messenger, but I don't know if I want to just buy it. If I have it as part of that subscription and that's how I do Sea of Stars, I think I'd prefer that. As opposed to like, because I don't know. Like The Messenger was a great action platformer. I don't know if they're going to be able to create a good RPG.
Really early on, I remember there being a lot of praise for the ways in which these kinds of models were really beneficial for the developers as well as the producers. Like PlayStation Plus was not only great for PlayStation, but it was also great for some of the games that were otherwise not really getting seen, right? And there was all of this talk about like PlayStation's giving them this percentage for every download and blah blah blah. I don't know if anybody has looked into that lately either.
Yeah.
Talking about like models that have been around for a few years now that probably need to, a good retooling now that we know how they actually work. I'd be very interested to hear what some of the financial models look like for games in that regard, right? Because if it's not like a specific download, if it's not like a specific like these are the 2 games available this month, and we have these numbers of people that downloaded them, so here's your money. What does that look like, right? Like I'm sure they can tell who's playing it and how often is getting played, but before me just going to get it because it was my free game that month, like I still do that with PlayStation. I don't play them all right away, if ever, but I do go grab them because they're free. They're mine. I'm going to go get them. So I know that, at least according to what used to be true 10 years ago, that means that counts as a get for the game, and so that money then goes to the people that rightly coordinated. If it's not a direct me going to get a game, but rather this game is now available up there, like that's got to be cutting back on the on the amount of money that they're paying these people, right?
So it's strange. For the PlayStation 1, they are given an amount of money to be a part of it, right? We're going to give you that. And then those numbers that you're talking about, that is like quotas, and if we hit this many, then you get a bonus. Like there's an additional amount that we will give you. That tends to be it. And if that's not how it's working with PlayStation, that is mostly how it's working on Xbox. Because they're saying, we put it on our service, right? Sometimes they ask for exclusivity, like some with Vampire Survivors. They're like, yeah, we're going to put it on our system, but we want to have it exclusive for 6 months, which is why it wasn't until August that Vampire Survivors was able to get ported to the Nintendo Switch. So they pay for that bit of exclusivity, and then there are those things where, like, for anybody who plays the game, you're automatically added to the quota, and if you hit certain numbers, then you'll get more money from us. Because it was beneficial to both parties, you should get a cut of that. But then the other thing is, and the reason why, like, I am seriously considering canceling my subscription with Microsoft for the Game Pass, is because a lot of it is studios that they now own, and now you have access to these games. Mm-hmm. So, like, the model was always the razor blades, right? So it's one of those situations where we're losing money on the console, we're making money on the razor blades, or the games. If they own all those games and I'm paying them a monthly subscription cost to access those, there are months when I don't play an Xbox game. But I'm like, but I want it as an option. So, like, every time I do that, I'm just giving them money for nothing. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like with any of these subscriptions, right? The other one is, like, Netflix just came through, and Netflix is stupid expensive for, like, not anything crazy. I think it's, like, to have the 4K, which, why would we not want the 4K? We got the TV, we got the surround sound and all of that. It comes to $19.99 a month. And then I think about, I bought one of the movies that was in early access on Amazon, and it cost me that, and I'm like, the amount of money that I paid to watch this movie, and I do own it now. I have a license. I have a digital license for it, so I could watch it again. That was $20, where I'm just like, the $20 that I paid to Netflix, I'm probably going to get to watch like 4 or 5 movies. So, like, it's just the amount of data that I have collected specifically related to streaming entertainment and subscriptions, both television, movies, and video games, in this past week has been kind of staggering.
Yeah, well, and like the consumer loop that you're talking about with movies is also really interesting, right? Because, like, yeah, I could spend $20 on a DVD version of this. I could spend $20 on a digital version. Now, there's a conversation to be had there about how the digital version could just one day just disappear. We've seen that happen, and that sucks. And the DVD version may end up not being able to play on future technology and all that stuff, right? But that's the thing that, like, is really hard as an individual consumer to really kind of wrap your head around, is not just like the immediate financial decision of, well, it's $20 for one movie or $20 for all movies. Like, that is kind of like the first kind of hurdle. But the consumption loop of that movie, you buy that movie for $20 now, but now you have it in, to your knowledge, perpetuity, allows you to watch it forever, as many times as you want. Whether that's once or whether that's 1,000 times, that $20 kind of starts to seem more and more, quote unquote, worth it, right? Whereas that $20 to Netflix is only going to guarantee you access to that movie for right now until Netflix renegotiates and suddenly it's gone, which we've seen happen more frequently. However, if it's a movie that you are only ever going to watch 1 or 2 times in your life, isn't it just better to just watch it on Netflix and, like, yeah, okay, it's not on Netflix anymore, but I don't have any interest in seeing it. But you said something really interesting. You want the option, right? You want the option of it being there. That's what you're paying for, is that, like, security. But as I mentioned, with digital especially, that security is not necessarily guaranteed just because you're purchasing it. And, like, there is no good way that I know of to really consider that entire consumption loop of, I'm going to buy this thing and I am definitely going to watch it 5 times. So it makes it worth it to buy it, because that means for each watch, it's this much money, right? And each time I watch it, there's probably going to be 10 of my friends around. So that means it's this much money, right? Like, you can suddenly start to justify that $20 price for one movie when you think about it that way.
I mean, that $20 price for one movie. Sorry.
But can't you also do that with it on Netflix right now, right? And then how much past the time it's off Netflix do you think you're ever going to watch it again, right? Like, it's hard to kind of comprehend that stuff for a multitude of reasons. Information we don't have, information we do have but we don't know how to process. Like, it's really, really hard to do that math. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, the movie is not on Netflix right now, so that's the other thing. It is, pay this money for this movie, that I don't have access to on the other thing. So there is that time thing, right? And I don't know if this one will ever go to Netflix. In fact, I think based on existing deals that were in effect, if this is going anywhere, it'd probably wind up with like Max, or the other like pay TV channels that also have a streaming element. Just talking about it and not talking there. But what you're also forgetting in that consumption loop, and what ultimately made me say I'm going to buy this movie when it's available at home, is the fact that I would have seen this in the movie theater. And if I saw it in the movie theater, I'd be paying the same price and only have that one experience. And the reason that I didn't pay for it in the movie theater, but committed, I said, look, I would go to the theaters to see this film. This is a film that I am interested in. It's the type of film that I want to support, but I cannot justify paying the same price to go to a movie theater to see this movie in one of the small, rinky-dink little theaters where the screen size is probably the same when you consider ratios of room size to what I would be watching at home on a 70-inch TV. I can't justify giving them that money. For the same price, I can see something in like the laser projection theater, where I know that I am getting a higher quality visual and a higher quality audio than what I am currently reproducing at home for viewing.
Right.
So when it's one of those things, like, there's a reason why I didn't go see the last Disney movie that came out in theaters, even though I wanted to, even though I was off the day that it came out, even though my mother said, I would like to go see this movie with you. Because when I went to go get tickets, a freaking Disney film was only playing in the smallest theater available at my local Cineplex. And I'm like, this is not worth it. Especially if we're going to have their streaming service and I can just watch it at home, and then I justify why I have that streaming service that month that it comes to it.
Sure. Yeah, it's just that there's a lot of factors in that are being taken as definitive truth that aren't always going to be the case. And the thing is it will be the case 9 times out of 10. It's going to be that one time where it isn't the case, where suddenly you're going to be like, damn, like, I missed this thing, or I missed this movie, or I'm not going to get to see this thing now. I mean, like look at what happened when I mean, just to talk about them in a negative light, so this is not going to push anybody to them, like when Max canceled a bunch of shit like Infinity Train and unwatchable media now, right? Is like this idea that, like, well, shit, if I had known this was going to happen, I would have made other arrangements, but, like, who could have seen that coming?
Well, I mean, let's talk just about that, right? And this is another thing, and it's going away at the end of this month. And what I am afraid of is that anything that goes off of Max that is like original programming is never going to come back. That it's going to be dumped into that same yard as Infinity Train and Close Enough. It's Garden Wall. I'll just say Garden Wall. If you know, then you know. But the fact that is leaving Max scares the shit out of me. Because is that never going to come back? Is this another sacrifice to the tax gods?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's such a weird time. And there are other things that I wanted to talk about in the time before we got to tasks. And you know what? By God, I'm switching over to it. So speaking of evolving and enhancing itself, a game came out this week, Sejohn, that I didn't think I was going to ever want to play. Do you know what that game is?
No, you are really going to have to carry me through this one. I have no idea what we're talking about today. That's
fine. The ritual is complete. Let us continue into conversation. It's Blasphemous 2. Blasphemous 2 came out.
Yeah.
And I knew that it was coming. And I'm like, maybe I'll play through Blasphemous again. Because if you listened on this show, Blasphemous is one of those games that I played on Amazon Luna. Despite it being in version 2.0 at the time that it was available on Amazon Luna, which is, I think, the only other sort of like streaming game service that's still out there, right? Am I wrong in that?
That isn't attached to a specific console? Yeah. Yeah.
So it's out there. And I mean, I think Amazon would be like, well, our Fire Sticks are consoles. And it's like, oh, okay. That's an interesting way to look at technology that just upsets me all the time. Technology that I have left in the past. I'm just going to be straight about it.
I almost played Blasphemous this week too because it's been on like mega sale everywhere for like $6.
Yeah, I mean, I got it in a humble bundle with games that like I really wanted to play. One of them being like Ritual of the Night, and you know how I felt about it on this one. I kind of want to play it again and see what a difference some time has made. So if I was able to get games that I wasn't a huge fan of, plus I think Haiku the Robot might have been included. Like, it was one game where I'm like, well, I really want to play this. And if I do it through the Humble Bundle, I get Blasphemous, I get Rotten, I get all these games that I didn't love the first time that I know have been improved through patches. Right. So I'll give it another shot. And I never got a chance to play Blasphemous because mostly I've been playing Vampire Survivors. I will be completely honest about that. But then I saw Blasphemous 2 was going to be available, and then someone was willing to give me access to a copy. So I'm like, well, I'll give it a shot. Yeah, let's try it. And I have to say, if you go back and listen to when I complained about Blasphemous on the show, and honestly, I couldn't give you an episode. I feel like it was like an arc for a while where I was just playing Blasphemous and being disappointed because I was stuck inside with the pandemic and really didn't want to spend money on new games. So I was just using streaming. Every complaint that I lodged about Blasphemous has been addressed, making Blasphemous 2 the original game was the proof of concept, and now we're actually doing our best with the sequel.
Well, surprise, surprise. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, like that's something we've talked about a million times. Is that you very often have to wait for the sequel if you really want to see what the game is really attempting to do, right? Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, like I'm really glad to hear that you're back on board because, like, I gotta be honest. The thing about Blasphemous for me is, as somebody that is not down on that kind of gameplay loop, Blasphemous is really appealing to me just in like the artwork alone and like the conceptual stuff going on in that game in terms of like I am a sucker for a good story. I am a sucker for good artwork. It's part of the reason why in the Dark Souls-esque game universe, like Bloodborne is really the one that really gets me out of all of them, is because like the hooks of the story and the art design are just too fucking good. Whereas like Dark Souls, like I'm not big on high fantasy. That's just never been my bag. It took me a really long time to ever play a Elder Scrolls game as opposed to a Fallout game, despite them both being literally the same concepts of games from the same from the same studio, right? But that idea that like high fantasy is just not my bag, and then you got into other stuff that they've done in terms of other From Software games that they've really what's the big one that they just did with George R.R. Martin there that everybody's playing?
Elden Scroll.
Elden Scroll.
Like, Elden Ring. Blah.
Elden Ring. Did you see? Yeah, I wanted to say Elden Scrolls too, which is why I didn't say it. But,
Elden Ring.
You even have like your Elden Ring one, right? Like those just don't grab me like Bloodborne does, right? Blasphemous hits me that same way. There is just some cool shit going on in the Blasphemous like story and artwork that I was just like, I'm down on this. Like I love this. Can't play it for the fucking life of me though. To be fair, I only played it as demo mode way back in the day, so like I need to also try and dip back into it. Maybe now that it's available for like $6, maybe I will.
Yeah, I don't know. The first game, there was the only issues that I really had with it was just like this game feels unfinished. Like, oh, if you happen to die to this boss, you can't reclaim all your stuff that you've lost. Like, sorry. It's like, no, that's not fun for me.
So, and you mentioned you played it on the Luna, and it was on version like 2.0 the whole time, but that was out of what? Because
no. I played it on the Luna, and it was on version 1.16 or 1.7, but 2.0 was available everywhere else.
Right.
So I was playing in a borked version of the game that they just never updated for whatever reason.
Well, there's a reason. It's the Amazon Luna. They just didn't care to, man. It's like there's no deeper thought there. The Luna is like an afterthought for everybody, if it is even a thought nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still paying for it. I haven't touched it in a year, but it is because I was one of the early people. It's only like $5 a month, and I mean that's stupid. That's a stupid thing to do it. But as I have watched the price increase and increase and increase, I'm like, it really feels kind of okay to like be giving them like my tithe every month.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's strange, but you know that's related to Blasphemous. The reason I would use the word tithe, because here's the fun thing about Blasphemous 2's story: you're a living abortion being sent to kill the child of like majesty.
Oh,
That's
okay.
like the whole like a child is going to be born from the sky, and your job is to go kill it before it's born. That's why Blasphemous woke up again. And I call him Blasphemous. I know he is the penitent one, but it's real cool to call him Blasphemous.
I like it. I like that that's just his name.
I am Blasphemous, the penitent one. So that's it. But what really got me...
We need some dark gothic shit done. Who do we go to do? Oh, dude, that's right, Blasphemous. Let's go get him. Let's go wake him back up.
Yeah. And it's my favorite part about it, and why I'm definitely going to talk about it on the show. Like it's I want to give it like it's proper, is one of the big changes to this version. And I think that like with later DLC, they also did it. There you have separate weapons that you can use. So instead of just the big fuck you sword, there's like a scimitar that's very similar to that sword.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a rapier and an épée, where like you have the long sword and the short sword, and it's faster when you want to, you know, block things or parry them, as opposed to using the scimitar. And then the last one...
mechanic in Blasphemous? Is there a shield mechanic in Blasphemous?
There is a shield mechanic in Blasphemous.
Okay.
Where if you do it, it can open it up, or you just don't take damage. And that's it. And then the last one is this flail that can also be lit on fire. It's essentially if you're using one of the lanterns from Service to just be a fucking asshole, you can light it on fire and have added fire damage, but also it's a big fuck you lantern that you're just swinging around.
Yeah.
And so I see these three weapons and I'm like, well, I'm going to start a run with all three of the weapons, and I'm going to like play for half an hour and see how I feel about all of them. That went away because unlike other games where you're given that opportunity, there's like an immediate boss fight after you're given the weapon. And it's not some like easy boss fight. It is the kind of boss fight where like if you've played the first game, you'll understand you need to learn the pattern and then take advantage of the pattern. And then of course, once you have the pattern figured out, like we're going to fuck with you. And, you know, fuck you. We're Blasphemous. You're an asshole. That's the different Blasphemous from Blasphemous the Penitent one. That's Blasphemous as the Royal Blasphemous. But so I got to that boss and I'm like, oh, I get to try out each of these weapons against this boss. And so that's what I did. I tried it with all three. And honestly, kind of surprise to me, I went with the big like flail lantern thing. I didn't even bother with like the fire mechanic. I didn't know the fire mechanic existed at the time where I beat it. But there's a thing where if you duck an attack, he swings it before he releases it. And if you just jam on the attack button, he just keeps spinning it. So like you get up into crotch of a big dude and he can't hit you, and you just spin the flail till they die. So nice. I'm like, that's the Devon Decker way right there. And it looks like maybe I'm going to unlock the other weapon.
You gotta cheese it, man. It's like the only way I can get through those types of games is finding those little burps.
Well, I really loved that. Like, I have that whole thing, and that's how I'm working. However, the second boss that I fought, and that was about, like, an hour deeper into the game, having some exploration, learning some more lore, that cheese technique did not work. Like, it very much was, yeah, we know what you've been fucking doing. Why don't you go kill yourself?
Oh, man.
But
excellent.
I night and day the way that I feel about it. Like, I'm probably still going to go back to the first game to play it in like a more complete state. Like, the stuff that wasn't working in that version that was on Amazon Luna, be it 1.16 or 1.7, it was just like it was anti-gamer. Like, it wasn't one of those, it's hard because it's the way we designed it. It was, you should be able to reclaim your souls and everything after you lose to this boss, but we just coded the floor wrong, so your marker fell through it and into a place where you can't get it.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So
fantastic. Glad that that's turned around for you. I thought you were going to tell me that this was some game that involved our new friend.
Oh, no. No, our new friend, the secret task from last week, Sejohn's secret homework assignment, that is... okay, so I'm a G.I. Joe guy. I was a G.I. Joe guy. Will once asked me how many G.I. Joe classified figures I have. That's a new line from Hasbro. It came out during the pandemic. I actually want to say in like 2021 is when they released the first Snake Eyes figure. And it was all right, well, like, what's the sizing on them? Are we talking like big guys, like the Marvel Ultimate stuff, or? So it's Marvel Legend size. It is about, it's 1/12 scale is the way that you would describe it. So it's like Marvel Legend size figure, Star Wars Black Series, all of that. But with G.I. Joes, that's the G.I. Joe classified, as opposed to like there's still a G.I. Joe line, which is the 3.75 inch figures. Which is what G.I. Joe was when we were younger. And as a kid, I loved G.I. Joe. I didn't have any of the vehicles. So then when the 20th anniversary, it was the 30th, when the 30th anniversary rolled around and we were still in college, and it was me and freaking J-Bro going around hunting for G.I. Joe figures, making friends with all the people at the Target so they would go back and get us the Target exclusive figures. Which I don't have any of those anymore. I kept one figure. It was Lady J. And that's because I used her as my scale in my scenic design course final project. Like, I have sentimental mentality that attaches me to that figure. So the classified stuff I got really into. And I have a bunch of them. I have too many of them. Is the thing. I wish I could find the list where Will was like, well, how many do you have? And I'll just put it this way. I have 4 Roadblocks, Series 1 Roadblock, and that's a terrible figure. But I just kept finding him on special at Walgreens, and I'm just like, I'm going to buy him. Because I know that people hate him now, but who knows? I have an army of the Red Ninja figure. Like 7. I have 7 Red Ninjas. I have 4 Scarlets. Again, the same reason for Roadblock. I have 3 Gung Ho.
Just to clarify, these are not like secret buys where like you open them up and you're like, oh, surprise, it's this guy. Like you knew exactly who you were buying when you bought these multiples, right?
The original problem with the G.I. Joe classified line, right, was you could not find them anywhere. They would be released and they would be like bought and you would never see them again. And then when I went to a Walgreens and I found my first Red Ninja figure and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm buying you. And then I'm like, oh my God, now like I'm in it. I hate myself, but I'm totally in this right now. I had already had that big fuck you Snake Eyes that was like a $50 figure and came with hundreds of things and was like, this is our proof of concept figure. But then the Red Ninja, I'm like, oh, well, now that I know I can get them at Walgreens, I'm going to go to Walgreens. I used to do, before we recorded the show, I would drive around to 3 specific Walgreens. Yeah. And it would be my, like, going out into the world for the week, because we were still on, like, a semi-lockdown with everything that was going on. So it was, like, a way to interact with the world, and I just bought too many G.I. Joes. And that has continued up until I purchased our new friend here. Because I have some issues with the G.I. Joe classified stuff. Primarily the fact that the price continues to go up. I believe it's $27 for a figure now. And the quality has been going down. Those figures that I mentioned, like the Gung Ho, I have 3 Gung Hos. His weapons were hard plastic, but now, like, I bought a Rakondo figure that was a Target exclusive. His gun was made of super soft plastic, so, like, it's all warped and looks stupid. And, like, that's just the thing. And the Gung Ho, when I bought it, it was a $20 figure. Now they're $27, and, like, the weapons are going to come out ruined.
Melty.
And gross looking. And that's just because of how we packaged it. Like, it's not one of those situations where you can go out and you can try to find a bunch of them to find one that has a good gun. No. We've packaged it so that, like, it's bent in the case, in the package. So that when you pull it out, like, it's just been sitting there like that since we put it in to the box at the warehouse. So it's learned that lean. And you could get it hot and, like, try to fix it, but I don't want to do that, right? Like, it's not that. So then I found Action Force. My first figure from the Action Force line. So Action Force is a line that's done by Bobby Valla, who is a former employee from Hasbro, who does the G.I. Joe classified stuff. He used his time at Hasbro to find out that the Action Force line, which was what G.I. Joe was called in Europe, that the trademark on that had lapsed. So he was able to get the Action Force trademark and a bunch of figures that were assigned to that, like the Steel Brigade, which was a mail-away G.I. Joe figure that, like, you would say, well, I wanted to have this gun, that. There's, like, 7 different permutations of Steel Brigade figures that were in that original mail-away. So he also grabbed the Steel Brigade trademark, and he's like, I'm going to start making the action figures. I know how to do it from my time at Hasbro, but I'm going to try to address some of the problems that I am seeing with these action figures. Okay. So it's third-party, boutique sort of line, right? This figure specifically, the Swarm Trooper, when he initially released, was a $35 figure. It's hard to know because what I got for Sejohn to look at and for us to do a little review on is a Swarm Trooper with his Swarm gear. So those two things together are averaging about $48. And, I mean, I don't love that. It'd be nice if he came with his gear right out of the package. But I will say they just released a convention exclusive of this character in red with red laser wings instead of yellow laser wings. And it was $45. So, you know, like, I feel like I'm not getting ripped off, especially as all of the new things he just announced, that new figures going forward are only going to be $32 as opposed to the $27 from Hasbro. And what you get in the box, have you opened up your figure yet, Sejohn? Let's do that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so while Sejohn opens his box, I'll open my box up. I have it right here. And this is going to be fun, right? Visual stuff on the audio podcast. But, you know, maybe we can paint a picture, or maybe it'll be enough for you to go look out at this stuff. So the first thing that I want to point out, do you have them out of the box yet? I don't know if you had like a note.
Yeah, pretty much. Go ahead, though.
Okay. So the first thing I want to highlight in this is a G.I. Joe classified figure has one pair of hands. And that is the pair of hands that come on the figure. Okay. I can only think of the only time that I know for a fact that has been different is Snake Eyes, that like big fuck you Snake Eyes, figure 00. He came with a hand that was like throwing a shuriken that could replace one. But other than that, like what you saw is what you get, right? You look at this Action Force Swarm figure, he has 4 pairs of hands. He has fists. He has open hands for holding things. One of them has a horizontal joint on it. One of them has a vertical joint on it. And then it has, like, I don't know how to do it other than, like, I can't think of, you hold the not the stock. What is the part of the gun where you, like, steady it? What is that called, Sejohn? Maybe you can make me sound like not an idiot here.
The butt of the gun? What are you talking
about? The barrel.
I'm sorry.
The underbarrel. That's what it is.
Okay.
They have a hand that is like curled so that if you put a gun in it, like you'll have it on the handle where the trigger is, and then you'll also be able to rest the barrel in it, so it looks like, you know, someone who's actually holding a gun. As opposed to with G.I. Joe, like, they have the one hand that could hold the gun and it has a trigger figure, and then the other one looks the same thing. But you can only put the gun in one of the hands. And they usually only have, like, one gun. So the second thing, in addition to, like, a fuck ton of choices for what this character can have as their hands, the original figure also comes with a long sort of rifle, a shorter handgun, and also a knife. Now, do you have him out of the plastic yet, or are you just looking at the... So, if you look at it, he can hold everything that he comes with except for the extra hands, right? Like, you'd probably need a Ziploc bag for that. But there's storage for the knife, there's storage for the handgun, and then he would be holding the rifle.
Okay, yeah.
And then you have this figure that, like, really nice paint job, right? Like, it looks really good. I don't know, like, the feet. I love the feet on this character because they're, like, big and it's not hard to stand him up. But then, lo and behold, it also comes with a stand, which they don't have G.I. Joe classified stands. If you buy the Walmart exclusive figures, they come with stands. But, like, you also get less accessories with those figures.
No, the stand is a nice little add-on, especially because, I mean, not to
jump ahead, let's talk about
it. There's an alternate stand in the add-on box.
And that's what you basically get with any of the Action Force figures. Talking about just the figure, you get a stand, you get usually 4 pairs of hands, the pair that originally comes on the figure, and then 3 additional ones, and then you're going to get usually a handheld weapon, a 2-handed like rifle, and a knife. And that handheld and the knife is going to have storage on the figure. And then other characters like the series 3 that just came out, all of them come with magazines for the gun, storage for those magazines, and the magazines can be pulled out and replaced. So, like, there's just a lot of potential with these toys. And compared to what you get when you pay, like, $4 less for the G.I. Joe figure, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. I mean, I still have, like, a couple of pre-orders out there, and I don't know if I'm going to cancel them or not. But I wanted to, like, just call this up. First of all, I love this figure. I absolutely love this figure. Mostly because of the translucent eyes and how, like, you can see inside, you can see the ball joint of the head, but, like, I don't care. It just looks freaking cool. And then there's also the flavor text of the character on the back, which G.I. Joe Classified has just eliminated that. There are QR codes on the cases that you can scan, and then you're supposed to be able to get a bio for the characters, but that's not, I don't want to have to do extra work.
Yeah, like, that's some Destiny bullshit right there. You gotta go to our website if you want to hear the real story. Like, well, fuck you.
Yeah, but and honestly, I didn't realize this when I first got into the Action Force stuff. I didn't know that characters had backstories. I thought that they were just, like, fun figures that he wanted to create. And I was a little bit disappointed that they weren't blank canvases that I could apply my own story to. But all of that has flown away as, like, the Swarm Trooper. Do you want to read the flavor text on the back for that, Sejohn?
Yeah, I can, let's see here. After the fall of the United States, each government maintains order by declaring themselves an independent republic within their territories. Many of these republics were left with minimal or no military assets for defense, making them vulnerable to attack by rival republics. To counter this threat, Redacted introduced a solution called the Swarm. The Swarm is a paramilitary group controlled by Redacted, and it is comprised. It is comprised of former military personnel from both the U.S. and foreign nations. Swarm troopers undergo surgery to install neural implants in their brain, allowing them to interface as a group, much like a hive of insects. That is terrifying. This allows each team member to receive real-time information and react faster as a team, rather than as an individual. The cost of utilizing these highly trained mercenaries is high, and Redacted exacts a significant toll on its customers. and their control of their republics, making them a pawn in a larger game. Yeah, so he's not a good guy.
I mean,
He's not even
he's
really
not a
the
bad guy
anymore.
either. He's like a mercenary. It's weird that like there are levels. I don't know. Like the whole story of it, I didn't realize that like it was the world. All of the governments have fallen.
Yeah.
But I'm just like a real big fan of it. And then you look at the fact that the G.I. Joe stuff, you're not getting a lot in those cases, right? I think the most I've ever gotten with a standard figure is that Red Ninja, which is, again, why I fell in love with him. And by standard figure, I mean one that I can get at retail. There are retail exclusives at, Target or Amazon. Those are the two big ones. And those generally will have a little bit more accessories, but the price is also higher. And that is sort of the 1-2 punches. I got this character, and again, I paid about $45 for him to have everything. At the same time that I bought a Kamakura figure from the G.I. Joe Classified line, and he was $32. And he came with a bunch of weapons that were soft plastic, and like one of his staffs was just bent in the box. And there's no way that you can see that because they're not window boxes at Hasbro anymore. Because they say that the plastic free, it's for the environment. But, it's nice to see what you're buying.
Yeah, it also allows them to shove cheap plastic into a box and you don't know if it's bent or not.
Exactly. So it's just been like, these are the figures that I now want to represent. And in this whole doing the task part of it, I thought it'd be interesting. I mean, first of all, it's in Say Report colors. He's a very yellow figure.
He is. I like it.
So I dig that part of it. It'll be fun to I thought it might be fun to each of us have him on the desk, right? Another thing to tie us together besides our bright yellow keyboards. But then the other thing that I want to talk about is the gear set. And, even though, oh man, I feel like I didn't get anything with this G.I. Joe figure, Hasbro has not done anything with the classified line in terms of like the sort of accessory packs that you used to get with the 3.75-inch G.I. Joe figures.
Okay.
So that's another thing that Bobby Valla with Action Force and his Valaverse has been addressing. So the gear sets tend to be like $10, and in it you get things that kind of make the figure more complete feeling in a way. I certainly feel like this one does.
Let's be blunt here. One of the things in the gear set for the Swarm Trooper is the wings, which you would think would have been on the actual figure, as that is their whole like steez.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like there is something going on there that definitely, the shield is nice too. I'm only mentioning, basically I'm going down in size in the accessory verse. I already mentioned that the alternate stand that's available, that I like the yellow plastic stand as opposed to the metal one that you get. It's not really metal, but the metal painted one with the actual figure. And then you get a couple of extra weapons. You get essentially an Uzi, it looks like, and a rocket launcher or a grenade launcher.
Yeah, I think it's a nade launcher. It's the same nade launcher. Like I had mentioned, I own 3 Gung Ho's. One of the first proof of concept things that Bobby Valla did was an upgrade kit that could take the Gung Ho that they released. And Gung Ho is on my desk. I'm a fan of Gung Ho. I like that he's a Marine. I like that he's from New Orleans. Like there's a lot about that character that works for me. But his original toy was done in bright teals. Like this guy. He kind of looks like he was on vacation from the Village People when you be completely honest about how Hasbro designed him. And one of the things that they were originally doing with the G.I. Joe Classified line that people were not a huge fan of were trying to make the figures look more realistic. Like if they existed in our real world, this is what they would wear. Which is really strange because I had mentioned that like Scarlet and Road block that I have a bunch of characters of. They have bright gold in their armor, and like that's why people hated them, and that's why I was able to get, I believe I bought 4 Roadblocks ones for $5, and I mean total. Like these are on that deep a clearance because we need to get them out of here, and it's because like people were like that looks too garish for like the real world aesthetic you're trying to apply to this. But then they were able to release them again in like more muted colors. And that's the other thing is like the repaints that they've done for G.I. Joe Classified. If I think of like specific molds that I own, it's a whole other thing. But like that's not what we're talking about here. So far they haven't really done anything like that. The mold that they do that with, they have troopers that are like just blank slates, single color, or like green, but then they have on like silver arm and knee pads, and then they just have like a face mask on. Those are only $20. Like, it's not even like a character like the Stormtrooper who like has some actual flavor text and thing behind him.
Right.
So that, but then these gear sets that make them feel like more complete. First of all, I agree that the stand that comes with him is so much better. You turn on your cell phone light, you pop it under there. It's just haunting. It's a haunting sort of tableau that you've created.
Of this man with no mind.
Of this man that, well, I mean, he has some mind. He can just interface with, yeah, no, it's terrifying what they did. I want to know who Redacted is.
Yeah, right? We got to get into the Action Force law.
But it is. So I haven't gone crazy with them yet. I still have more G.I. Joe classified stuff. But it is something that, like, I don't know. And the announcement that the prices are coming down a little bit as he now has a factory that is producing them, because it's not like small orders just for like boutique sale, but he's actually doing like full runs. So he's able to get that bulk purchase sort of discount. It was a good time, I thought, to like highlight something that has come into my life. I mean, I'm really trying to move away from collectibles, but part of that is finding significant collectibles that are worth the money, as opposed to buying a bunch of cheap stuff that ends up not being worth it.
Sure.
So
just like you like, just I adore like little details that like who's ever gonna really see this unless you are the one that owns it and plays with it a little bit. Like the bottom of feet, right, or feet in general. Like you mentioned you like the paint job and the styling of it, but if you look underneath and on the bottom, the little like hive boot tracks that he leaves behind and stuff are fantastic. Like there's a couple of other figures that I have that they don't do much with the feet, right? Like they're just they're once they get down to that part of the figure, they're basically there just to make sure that they can like stand up, right? So like I've got some Simpsons figures and stuff that don't really do much in that regard, but the ones that do some type of detailing or anything even down to that level are always impressive to me. I'm thinking of like I've got a comic where like under his robe you can see his little feet. There was no reason for them to do that. That's just delightful. Or when I was growing up, one of my favorite toys that I ever had was from Disney World. It was a Woody doll, right? And the fact that like it had really cool like wear and tear on the bottom of the feet, and it had Andy written, but like starting to be scratched out. Like the detail on it was just so perfect, like that kind of stuff. Or getting like a Buzz Lightyear with Andy written on the bottom of it too, right? Like that kind of thing. Any company that is out there, any artist that is out there designing the stuff and paying that much detail, that much attention to little details like that, like it just warms my heart.
Yeah, and we talk about all sorts of art, and this is like not modern day sculpture, especially because the bigger issue with toys is that kids today are not buying toys. Let's just be honest about it.
Damn kids, yeah.
Millennials, people who grew up in the 80s, inundated by the commercials that were sold to us as entertainment, are the people who are going out and spending this money. It's why we've seen such an increase in toy prices. I mean, just in the last 4 years. At the start of what was that?
Oh yeah, I was agreeing. Yeah, we've seen a huge uptick because, like you said, they've really picked up on the fact that like, well, we could make cheaper toys and try and sell a bunch of them, but that's always hit or miss. Whereas on the other hand, if we make a smaller amount of toys but make them like high end and market them to older people, we're much more guaranteed to get that money.
Yeah. And that's just like a sad thing, because those figures at the beginning of the pandemic were $20 for a Marvel Legends figure, and now it's closer to $30, and that's in 4 years. I mean, it does, like,
part of it is it doesn't fucking help that every time they come out with some type of merchandise for a specific thing geared at kids, that movie or TV show gets pushed back 6 months, and suddenly McDonald's is giving you toys for Mario 6 months before the game comes out. That kind of shit.
Yeah. That was weird, and it's going to continue to be weird. I mean, we're not going to talk about it, but a significant film that just kind of proves that they are the villains of this piece has been delayed from November to March, and the fact that like the producers are, well, we've already dumped all that money into it, and now like that's all a wash. That's all wasted money because we had to delay it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I'm so sorry for you. Like, is it done? Why are you delaying it?
I mean, I think the fear is that they're delaying it for financial like books, right? Like they're doing it in order to like reshape financial figures for certain times of the year and stuff like that, which is getting eerily close to what they did last time around when suddenly a bunch of stuff disappeared that we'll never get to see again, as already referenced once in this episode. Like, it's starting to sound real creepily like the early stages of that again.
Yeah. I mean, just, there's been a bunch of delays because of the strikes, but I always thought that it was stuff that, like, wasn't shot, so, like, or was in the middle of shooting, so it's not going to be finished to hit those dates. By all accounts, this particular film should be done.
Yeah, and it's weird because there's this kind of conversation about, like, are current negotiations going to affect contracts involved with finished projects? You would think not, right? Like, it would always be, like, going forward. But a move like this, moving a major sequel back basically a whole like 6 months, 8 months I think maybe, but like moving it back that far really makes you wonder if it has to be part of this conversation that's currently going on, right? But how does it fit into that conversation? We'll never know for sure.
Well, probably reshoots if I had to guess.
Yeah, that can be the only that can be the only like Occam's razor explanation, right? Is like it's not exactly finished, right? We all were under the impression it was, but it just simply was not, right?
Yeah. Or test audiences hated it, or someone hated it. I mean, like, this is really shining a light on parts of Hollywood that, like, have existed, but we didn't realize how important it was to what we were actually seeing as final product.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, it's crazy. But then, back to these, yeah, so the Action Force stuff, I'm a real big fan of it. The prices are going to be more reasonable going forward, since they found an actual, like, base of collectors and everything like that. And yes, it's kind of sad that it's just like our generation who is still buying collectibles like that. I mean, kinda. At the same time, the plastic in this could probably be used for 100 other things that are actually useful, or we could not be using plastic at all because of the tiny microplastics that are, you know, comprising a significant percentage of all of our blood. sobering thoughts. Yep. An hour and a half into this episode of the Say Report.
We have always pointed to the ethics of consumerism and never taken a stance on it, and I think we're going to continue that trend right now.
Yeah, but it's something that, I mean, it's a figure that I've wanted to put into the hands of people that I know enjoy collectibles. You being one of those people, I was curious how you felt about it. And what it is.
It's weird because it has that kind of nature of, because it's not, from one of the big wigs, it has this weird nature to it where it feels a little bit like it's not a ripoff or like a parody, but like, it feels like it's second tier, right? Like compared to some of the other franchises that you've mentioned, right? Like, I mean, G.I. Joe, right? Like it feels like it is second tier to something like G.I. Joe. And in a way, that's because that's what its history was, right? And like, there's something to knowing that origin story that kind of flips that whole thing on its head, right? And so my first reaction when seeing them was like, who the hell are these guys, right? But then after like reading the back of the box and doing a little bit of like looking into stuff, and then now you like clarifying some things about like exactly where, because like I knew that they had spun off from G.I. Joe's, but I didn't realize that it was this one particular figure that had kind of done that, right? Like this one guy that had really kind of carried that on. Like I love the idea of the whole rights conversation because that's hilarious. There's been some really like goofy shit going around right now on YouTube Shorts Shorts and TikTok regarding Sierra Mist versus Starry, and about how apparently that had something to do with a rights lapse that may or may not be true. Like those kinds of stories just always like make me fucking giggle. Like some idiot out there didn't think to renew the copyright claim, and like, and it's always in like one country. Like they renewed it in America, but they sure as hell forgot about it in Croatia. And so like somebody over in Croatia bought it up real quick, and it's like, well, this fucks us for the entire international market. What the hell? That kind of stuff is just like ridiculous to me, and really kind of shines a light on some of the weirder aspects of like how creative shit gets handed off and played with, you know. That's fascinating, and I love that stuff.
Yeah. And you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, that's probably one of the reasons why the G.I. Joe classified stuff in every other country but America is online sales only direct from Hasbro Pulse. Because if somebody scooped it up and like that's the way that they have to distribute it or risk other issues, I don't know. But like that's the other thing, is that G.I. Joe, the thing that they said is that it's just not as popular outside of America. And like that I get that. So that's why it has to be direct sales. But it's kind of, I mean, we've seen Hasbro, what they did with Ghostbusters when they had that license, and then like none of the figures sold. That was like, that's crazy that happened. Similar thing happened with Dungeons and Dragons, which should be less of a problem for them because Wizard of the Coast is part of Hasbro, but still, like, they're not doing any other characters from that. And Indiana Jones, right? Which, like, we did 25 figures and that's all we're gonna do. So, and I know that that's like kind of talking about other things, but G.I. Joe would probably be the next one on the chopping block. Oh, Fortnite. They had the Fortnite license. Yeah. And they just were done with that as well, even though we have all these figures in the pipeline. So the fact that, like, G.I. Joe Classified, I mean, it's still selling gangbusters whenever they come out. You can't find them on the shelves. However, like, if it doesn't have an international market, like, what's the incentive to keep it going? Mm-hmm. So finding an alternative.
We've seen a lot of shit this week kind of hit that same wall, right? Like not just toys, but movies and some video games and things like that as well. We've seen some really interesting things going on in terms of like, you know, this is actually hitting pretty big for a moment in America, but like because they can't carry that international market, which is a really interesting conversation when you consider some of the political stuff going on right now in terms of trying to decouple like our industries from foreign markets, realizing how much of our like success measures and profitability has been measured by or included at least international markets in those. We're going to have to start rethinking like what we consider to be successful numbers for things if we're not going to include international markets in that, right? And this is really interesting because it's coming at it from the other direction, right? That you have a company that is so focused on how international markets play into it, and they can't keep a thing going without it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing, and the story got it, and it made a believer out of me, so I'm happy to share it. And these are the laser wings. Why don't we get to those Gossamer wings and talk about your task for this week?
Yeah. So I pointed you all towards Skottie Young, and specifically his series I Hate Fairyland. As I mentioned, Skottie Young's done like a whole bunch of really goofy stuff over the years. He had a really silly and kind of inconsequential run on Deadpool. I think more importantly was kind of the work he was doing on Rocket and Groot and Rocket Raccoon. Skottie Young's work there really kind of became kind of definitive in a way that like we will probably see his version of those characters in other forms in the coming years, right? Like in much the same way that you can point to like artists like Matt Fraction and what he did for Hawkeye, kind of becoming like the definitive like version of Hawkeye for a while, right? Or when we look at like Ultimate's Spider-Man and that and the way in which that kind of shaped so much of the Marvel universe going forward, both in comics and other places.
On that exact thing about the ultimate versions of characters, Ultimate Captain America, I found out from a conversation this past week, is like people's Captain America. Like, I didn't realize that, like, I always thought of that as, it's Mark Millar. It's very, like, kind of grim dark. He's very semi-ultra violent. And I'm
Yeah.
like, it's a cool thing that they did with the character, but I never really thought that it had, like, grasped onto anybody, especially with the other more mainstream versions of the character. And then someone shared with me, like, the figure, and they're like, I'm getting this for my son because I wanted to have that definitive Captain America. And I'm like, that's Ultimus Captain America, right? And like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that, like, there was a character that had taken that way. The Ultimates are such a weird freaking version of the Marvel characters. There's stuff that I love, and then there's other stuff where I'm just like,
Yeah, well, and so that's why I love a group like Image Comics that really is willing to kind of just push anything that's not that stuff, right? Is because like you really kind of, it's a whole new ballgame when there is not like this whole like ghosting of other versions of your characters and stories coming through. I say that, but like a lot of what I Hate Fairyland really is harkening back to a lot of like fairy tale and Disneyfied versions of those stories and things like that, and fantasy stuff in general. Like so. I asked, or I pointed to the first kind of volume collection, which I think takes like it takes like 1 through 5 or 1 through 7, I think, of the I Hate Fairyland stories.
It's 1 through 5.
Yeah, from like way back in like the 2014 2016 era, because as I mentioned, this is a comic that is still getting like getting published every now and then. And then in terms of collections, like there was a collection that just came out this year. In fact, I think we got two. I think we got a collection, a trade paperback of just the normal run. But just this year, I Hate Fairyland actually had a Untold Stories omnibus put out. A lot of like this was the unpublished stuff, but we're gonna put it in this trade. And so it's an ongoing series that Skottie Young comes back to every so often when it seems like he's not working for one of the other bigs, right? Like when he's doing kind of his own thing. And it's just there's a whimsical violence on display in this series that I feel like we've really gotten away from in a lot of other comics because so many comics, especially in the 2000s and the 2010s, really got like introspectively violent. I don't know how to put it. Like the 90s was nuts in terms of like the violence on display in comics. And this is not me saying like this is not me wagging a finger. I adore like some of the just gruesome, weird ass shit that was coming out during the 90s. I mean, in terms of characters that were created and the art that we were seeing on display, like there was some shit from the 90s that redefined what comics was and really pushed back against some stuff going on at the time in terms of what parents and authority figures wanted to see in comics and things like that. And I think by that nature, right, what happened in the 90s, it really led into the 2000s when we as a culture started to really look at violence after, 9/11 and stuff like that. Like there's still an amazing amount of violence on display on the page there, but it is so much more, it's exploring things like the realism of it. When you talk about like some of the art that you start seeing, especially when you start talking about like some of the guys like working with Garth Ennis and Warren Ellis, the artists that they have to kind of bring on to tell some of their stories, right? Like, there's some gruesome shit that you start to see on the page. So seeing somebody take that whole oeuvre and just go in this whole other direction with it, that is some much more like watching like a Saturday morning cartoon show than anything else, has been what was refreshing when I first discovered this series, and continues to be as I every now and then go back to it. So I found myself just like dipping back into it. I don't know why. Like I don't know what it is about the series. I don't know why I found myself in it again, but I found myself once again in it. I think I mentioned that like I'm part of a Google Rewards program that anybody that owns a Google phone can be a part of. But essentially, if you let Google like tap into you every now and then and ask you a couple of questions about like, hey, were you just at the supermarket? It's like, yes or no. Maybe you've got it completely wrong and I was not. Then they'll throw you like 10, 20 cents for like answering a couple of questions about like where you were and what you were doing there. And the thing is like, I am of the mindset with this program, that like they're already kind of doing that. This is a way to allow me to have some agency in the transaction. Literally, I'm getting paid for it. Also, I get to tell them sometimes, like, no, I'm not going to give you information, because they ask, like, were you at the supermarket? Yes. Then the next question is, would you care to talk to us about it? Like, would you care to share your receipt? Would you care to actually give us info about what you did? And you have the option to say no, and they'll still throw you like 10 cents. But I get the impression that if you say yes and you go a little bit further, maybe you'll get 30 cents this time. I've gotten all the way upwards of $1, depending on what kind of questions they've asked. And so I save that money up, and I can use it to buy movies, buy music. I can buy and I can buy books. And so I've been finding myself over the last year or so, every couple of weeks, what I actually do with that money is I go on Google Books and just find something quick to buy. Whether it's, my new copy of John Dies at the End that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, or it's the first volume of this. Did I mention on the show that like I got real into diving back into Burke Brecht and Opus and Bloom County and all that shit, right? Like I found myself revisiting that stuff too. I read the entirety of Hack Slash, at least what's available digitally, over the last year. Something that I probably should have brought up on the show while I was doing it, but like I was enjoying it so much, and I didn't want to like lose track of it. Often when we talk about things on the show, like because I dump a bunch of information to everybody, it's suddenly not in my head anymore. Like I kind of get it out of my system, and I find myself not always going back to TV shows, going back to books, going back to video games after we've talked about it extensively. And I think that I kind of instinctually didn't want that to happen because I was on such a tear with Hack Slash. So like I just didn't bring it up while I was reading it. But man, like I read through that series in probably about 3 months. Even all of the like crossover shit that it does with like Chucky and stuff like that. And it's that is a series sometime that we've maybe got to talk about a little bit more, but I gotta process it still, because like the ways that series plays with sexuality and violence is really wild, and the ways that like drawn on the page, like some of the stuff that you see, and that's because of the source material, but sometimes it's also just because of its audience, its market, and so here I am doing that same thing now with I Hate Fairyland, and I'm really, really curious to hear like why it's bubbled back up for me, and whether or not it's got any traction with other people, because that's the other thing about this series is I don't know anybody else that's reading this series.
Yeah. So I had never read it before. I will say this, Dale, when she sees me reading it, goes, "Oh, Skottie, I've been following him for years," and then takes out, she's got coloring books of his characters and things like that. So I had no idea that like you mentioned him last week, and I'm like, I don't know who that is. I didn't know that it was Scott with a K at the time or anything like that. So I got to learn some things about Skottie Young, and then Dale teaching me the stuff that she knew and how she came to him, where like he does a bunch of exclusive covers or variant covers for books that I was buying. So that's when I found his art. I follow him on Instagram, and she's showing me a bunch of stuff on that, and she's like, "So yeah, no, I've heard of this. I've never read it." So it was real interesting to see that it wasn't just a you thing, that he has a following out there and all that other stuff that comes.
Not looking at his art, like, go ahead and find some stuff, like you should, because some of it is just like really fun stuff. But it's I think you'd be forgiven for placing it kind of in like the chibi universe. Like,
definitely.
It over cutifies a lot of stuff, especially when the only reason I'm thinking of that is specifically because Dale and you mentioned that like variant covers for stuff, right? So like getting like variant covers for like Captain America or Wolverine or something, you very often get like the chibi effect of like little body, big head, almost looks like a Funko Pop in motion type stuff. Like that is definitely the realm in which he lives, right? But then you take that and you add a really like goofy ass layer of violence and rainbows over it all, and like that is where you land in like I Hate Fairyland.
Yeah. So I'm nervous about going forward. Like very clearly, the first 5 issues that we looked at today was a planned out story that he had wanted to tell. In fact, at the end of the 5th book, he details the whole creation of it and how it was a 48-page story, and it was originally like a middle-aged man, and then he had the idea of turning it into Gertrude, the 37-year-old trapped in the 8-year-old body she was in when she first came to Fairyland. And like, that was super interesting. And reading through it, like, first issue, you get everything from it, you see what's happening. The second issue, you see the parts of it that are going to be him sort of playing with fairy tale narratives and comic narratives. Specifically, that in the first book, she shoots the moon for being the narrator. And that's fantastic. And then that's also fantastic when you see the moon later on, and it's gone from being a full moon to a crescent moon because of the chunk of it that she has taken out. Loved that. That was like one of those moments that I like cheered when that moment occurred. But the fact that every book has a separate narrator who starts it until their untimely demise, that works for like a miniseries. I don't know if I could see that going forward in the other stuff. And again, I haven't looked past it or anything like that.
Yeah. And so, not to be spoilery, and I won't even talk about that specifically, but there are certain tropes that he just at some point isn't playing with anymore. Like, much in the way of like as you go from various types of fairy tales to stories to fairy tale, like the things that he's diving into, right? Like, sometimes it's a little Alice in Wonderland, sometimes it's a little bit more like grim fairy tale, like Pied Pipery, like talk about some darker shit. Like, sometimes it's just straight up Disney jokes. Sometimes it's not even that, right? Like, there's so some of that stuff sticks around, some of it doesn't. I personally think he has a really good handle on when a joke is done, right? And I think that is true in a lot of his stuff. I think it's why his version of Rocket and Groot is charming and endearing, even though and silly, and never really kind of overstays its welcome, and why so many people really fell in love with those versions of those characters. It's part of the reason why I think the Deadpool stuff didn't necessarily work for me with him, because I think the problem with Deadpool as a character is you really need a deft hand at writing the comedy, because you have to keep it up. He never stops. Wade just never fucking quits. It is like story significant in the early days of Deadpool when he suddenly stops being funny, right? Like, there's narrative based around that in the early days of his character. So because of that, Skottie Young doesn't have that kind of control in the Deadpool series of of maintaining that level as much as he does in his own work, right? Like with Hate Fairyland, and so isn't trapped in the same character tropes with somebody like Rocket and Groot, who are definitely goofy characters, but the idea that they don't always have to be on is a nice relief for a writer. But it's why Deadpool is such a hard character to write for. Like people get really kind of shitty about how much Deadpool has kind of just like taken over in some regards, much in the same way that like DC has their like Harley Quinn issues. But like, the reason that those characters are so interesting to everybody is that, as fun as they can be, they're very difficult characters to actually do well. And so when somebody does them well, it's really fun to celebrate that. And so many people want to take a swing at that. Not everybody succeeds. There's definite ways that you can find flaws in some of the ways these characters have been written. Like the Deadpool Max series, as far as I'm concerned, is just some of the worst comic book writing I've ever read. It pushes the character in ways to places that it's just not fun anymore, not charming. It doesn't work for me. Whereas like Skottie Young's Deadpool also doesn't work for me, but I go back to that in a second before I ever went back to any of the Deadpool Max stuff. And then like seeing what Young is capable of in these other series, I see where the issue is. It's that because Deadpool is just always cracking a joke, Skottie Young is stuck in kind of this place where he's running a lot of gags so far into the ground that it just doesn't work for me. Whereas in I Hate Fairyland, as I said, he's got so much more control over that loop, that kind of up and down nature of the comedy, that he can just ditch a joke when he wants to. He doesn't have to adhere to it any longer. Maybe you would feel differently. I don't know, because like you mentioned in like a very specific bit that you're not sure it would work long term for you.
It works perfectly when it is a contained story.
Right,
and you
right,
could
right.
tell that
So
he sets
I'd be
off.
curious to hear
Yeah,
what you would have to say about reading any longer. I think Young has a really good balance in that regard. But I also say that as somebody that has gone in and out of this series over the years, as opposed to somebody that this is all suddenly just dumped on, right? That's another thing, is like the context that I have of time, like with this series, you don't necessarily have the benefit of that, right?
true. I mean, and like when it finished, I'm like, this is a fine ending. I'm fine with how this happened. I liked this whole story. I really did enjoy it. The he had a deft hand with the comedy and the comedic elements. Some like really beautiful visuals. It dealt with, so spoilers for the thing. Like I said, she is an eight. She looks like an 8-year-old, but she's 37 years old. That's like a whole thing of it. She's been in Fairyland for like nigh on 20 years. So
Yes,
there's
because she's stuck in fairyland, she's not aging, and unlike our usual heroines in these stories, she doesn't get out in like a meaningful amount of time.
yeah. That's so it's one of those situations where, and they even play with that. But the second episode where she's like, I wish I could just be normal. And through, various things, her wish is granted. And the way that they fuck with that, the way that Skottie Young is one person, I don't know the they that I'm doing, a royal they, I guess. Like the fact that she has been eating pretty much nothing but sugar for the last 37 years. So she's like she's like post diabetic. And just like, it was such a good way to play with that character who like is eternally the child, like getting aged up. Cause like at first I'm like, I feel like a little bit like not great about this character being that. I hope that there's nothing like bawdy about it. Like I think about like how in animes or in mangas, the character that's like that, and how like then like she can be weirdly over sexualized because she's actually 27,000 years old. And it's like, it still makes me want to retch. I'm sorry. Like, oh, you found a gross loophole. Good job for you. And by addressing that moment right there, it like really kind of got rid of all that fear, and it was hilarious. Like it was handled in a very funny way.
Right.
What it reminded me of, this is huge Devon Sejohn like origin stuff. I had a lot of like memories of Korgarth the Barbarian.
Oh man, yes, yeah. That was only ever one episode of that, right?
There's only ever a pilot. There's like someone who wrote up a whole synopsis of a series, but by all accounts, none of those other episodes actually exist.
Yes, no, way back in the day. Or like that's around the same time that you get really early like Venture Brothers, right, and that sort of stuff too. Yeah, but Korgarth the Barbarian, a show that will never get another episode, so we.
So I feel pretty confident talking about it, and it was one of those situations where, like, we were staying at your house. I think it's because we were working the convention later on, right? So we're just like, we're closer to Providence if we stay here, and it was just like, oh, we're showing this episode, and it's like, oh, okay, and we watched it, and we're just like, that was awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
So like,
it plays with some really fun stuff in that regard. It's wild to me because like I mean, it is a crazy amount of violence, right? Like that is the hook of like the entire thing, really. You talked about how you were worried there was going to be some type of like body nature to it, and it's just that's not really where he goes with this stuff. Like I can't speak to all of the books because I'm still in the process of rereading them, and maybe there is some stuff that I'm probably forgetting about. Like there's always that one panel that people forget about, right? But like that's just not where he's finding the jokes. The comedy is coming from her anger, her misery at being stuck in this place. And like on top of that, it is a place that is specifically built, Fairyland is specifically a place built to be anything but that, right? And so that friction, that juxtaposition of her being like that is the entire bit. And so he doesn't feel the need, it feels like in the writing, at least in the story that he's telling, it doesn't need to go there, right? So if it did go there, I'd be right there with you. That like this feels unnecessary, this feels gross, this feels exploitive. But no, that's not where this is right now. This is all about like, you saying funny words instead of swears and like violently shooting the moon, like right, like that's that's the bit, and I think that's also part of it is why it feels so safe and comfortable. Is like I know, or at least it feels like it's not going to go to those places that are going to make me feel weird for reading it. As I mentioned earlier, I spent the last year reading through a lot of hack slash, and there are definitely moments of that you feel very uncomfortable. And again, I think the argument that any fan of that series would make is like, well, right, you're supposed to, just like those movies that it's referencing, like your Friday the 13th, like your Halloweens, like your Child's Play game, like you're supposed to be in these moments where you feel gross and vulnerable and all of these other things, because that's how that kind of storytelling affects you as an audience, right?
Yeah.
And so if you know that, if that's what you want, that's why you go to those types of movies. That's why you read those types of books. That's why you read those types of comics. I don't necessarily want that right now, so I'm not currently reading anything like that. This is what I'm feeling right now, and it feels good to have a safe place to do that.
Yeah. I mean, like, when you first started it, I thought of Fables, and Fables was an interesting comic book series that eventually I just grew tired of. This one, it really reminds me a lot of Tank Girl in the type of, like, comedic violence. Like, where she's shooting missiles from her bra. Like, that's, like, I'm fine with that because it's clearly a comic book that I'm reading. Like, I'm not bothered by it.
Right. It's using the freedom of the medium to do things, to do some utterly absurd things, right? And, like, I love that. I adore that kind of art, right? Like when we talk about like absurdism in any medium, like my ears always perk up. Whether it is a video game going to ridiculous lengths, like like I love me like a Bulletstorm. What's the Matt Led or what was the or Eat Led? What was the one that they had?
I'm pretty sure it's Eat Led. I never played. I played Bulletstorm.
But,
that game was crazy.
But like like that kind of shit. But there's always ways in which that goes too far or doesn't land, because then you look at things like your Duke Nukem Forevers, right? Like where that just kind of just doesn't hit for anybody. Like weirdly enough, they do tie that into Bulletstorm at some point, which is like a whole fucking wild, bizarre marketing thing. But yeah, so like that idea that absurdism, we should be able to play with that in all mediums across the board. And when people do and it doesn't really work, like we learn something from that. But the fun part is when people play with that kind of absurdity and it lands. People win Oscars for that shit nowadays. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, because like Tank Girl was satirizing the ultra-violence of the 90s, and what it feels like when I'm reading I Hate Fairyland is it's satirizing the grim dark that had sort of become comic books at the time.
Yeah, and well, not just comic books, right?
Yeah,
like across the board, there was stuff in all mediums that was exploring exactly this. I mean, even in video games, you can point to stuff like American McGee's Alice, right, and things like that.
Yeah, but it is, but Fairyland and the fact that like, oh, it's still all that grim dark, but it's got a hyper bright color panel, and like she is super introspective about how she has spent her life, and then when they introduce Happy, the other little girl who is brought to Fairyland. And that whole loophole, it's beautiful. Like it is thinking about story elements in this way that like clearly you put thought into this. Clearly it's not a series where we had one season and then we went on for 8 more seasons and just completely diluted everything that made that first season special. Like, so that's why I say I'm nervous to read more, because this was such a special experience. But I will also say this, hell of a fucking cliffhanger that this series ends on. And like, I do want to go back. It was hard for me. Like, I'm like, no, we have to try Blasphemous too. We can't keep reading. And also, we shouldn't keep reading, because as much as the rubric wants me to exceed expectations, I don't want to muddy what we're talking about today on the show. Yeah. Like, but I have it bookmarked, ready to go to the next one. Like, I'm ready. So, I mean, especially like I've been reading all the new Popeye stuff. Like the new Sunday Popeye stuff that Randy Milholland has been doing has been awesome. I'm so on board for it. And like this reminded me of that sensibility of like taking something that is like well worn and everyone knows how it's supposed to go, and then applying the modern sensibilities. Now, granted, these are modern sensibilities that are now 7 years old, but they I was still alive back then. I still understood what was the expectation, especially a certain film about letting things go and building snowmans was pretty big at the time, and had sort of infected the feeling like this is what people want again. And it's like, no, it's not. Some of us are effing sick of it. Some of us want to use cannonball miniguns to blow up the moon and the stars. And some of us want to rainbows.
You know, and there's a lot of stuff that since this series has come out has really leaned into that as well. But you know, we can't talk about this stuff right now. But like, but anybody that's been paying attention over the last few years of like how those types of stories have evolved in other mediums, like you could bet that some of that stuff is looking at this, right, and seeing this kind of stuff and saying, well, we could do that too, right?
Yeah, that's true. I don't know. So is there anything that you want to make sure you get off your chest about the homework assignment from you this week?
No, I mean, like, I encourage people to check it out. Just check out some of the artwork. Check out some other stuff he's done. If this isn't your bag because of the nature of like the absurd violence and stuff like that, as I said, he's written for other places before, and as Devon's pointed out, he's got a following in other mediums. You know, like if you can find Skottie Young's work somewhere else, and just check some of it out because it's just fun shit. It's just good old fashioned fun time.
Yeah, I mean, Dale being like, "Do you want to see a picture of him?" And I'm like, I guess. She's like, he just put it up on Instagram. And I'm like, thank you for whatever this is right here. It was cool to connect with her on that and it not be something that she would have had to have read the same thing for us to have that discussion. So that was cool too. Like a full-rounded creators, which is more about last week, but what are you going to do? While we're here and it's time to talk about homework assignments, let's talk about it. So Image Comics, they were responsible for publishing I Hate Fairyland. Did you know that Image also was responsible for publishing the 3rd volume of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Oh, I mean, I was aware, but yeah.
Of course you did, right? Thank you for playing the role, Sejohn. Well, my homework assignment this week, and it ties into earlier stuff because 2 episodes ago, I was complaining that we didn't have a release date for the DLC yet, for the Shredder's Revenge DLC. And then lo and behold, later that week, they gave us the DLC release date, which is August 31st. And that is, I'm beside myself. I am counting the days till the Thursday that is coming up this week where we're dropping this episode. So for my homework, right? I mean, you were probably going to do it anyway, but I do want to make sure that you like put in some significant time with that DLC, Sejohn, so that we can maybe explore it and discuss it. Something that I've been looking forward to, like, as by all accounts, probably going to fall short of my expectations. Not to be like doom and gloom about it, but I have some ideas about what I want that to be, and I don't know if it's going to happen that way. So
excellent. That's
it. And anybody else, you do it. If you're a listener of the show and we've played the Ninja Turtle game together before, I also invite you to reach out. I will be trying to do the DLC with a bunch of people so I can get other perspectives on it too. So either play it on your own, you'll have a couple of days before we record, and if you are someone who listens to the show, we thank you for being a listener, and reach out. I'll try to schedule a session to play some DLC with you. I think I've already may have reached out to some people too, but like, I'm just saying, if I've forgotten anybody, hit me up. And Sejohn, maybe we can do one too, or maybe we can't until after the show. I don't know.
No. We definitely are gonna need to because that's kind of the way that I frame that game. You know, is playing it online with everybody. Right? Is like I don't know. I will definitely play it on my own just to check out the stuff that drops, but I don't know if it will have anywhere near the same hit as it does when you're playing it with everybody else. So it needs to happen.
Well, especially because it looks very similar. I think I've mentioned this before to the Mr. X's Revenge DLC from Streets of Rage 4, and that in co-op mode was awful. I did not like that at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know. That caught in my throat there.
No, you didn't like it that much. I get it.
Yeah.
All right, man. This is what we're gonna do. We've talked a lot about AI, and we've had to kind of talk around a lot of stuff because of the nature in which it's being, really pushed on people. Here's the thing, though. AI and creative AI things have been like kind of out there and in the water in so many forms for years now. And there is a huge, huge scene bubbling on YouTube right now that is going to kind of be. People are already talking about this. This is not. I'm not going to act like we are discovering this, but this is something that I think a lot more people are going to start becoming more and more aware of, because as these conversations about AI and in the medium of film and television kind of become really big, people don't realize that a lot of the fears that people have about what's happening in film and television have already been happening in music for a while. So I want you to check out the channel AI One Future, all one word. AI One Future, all one word. There are other AI music channels out there if you can find a couple of other ones. The reason I'm picking this one is because they are all musicians that I can see them kind of working with right now. There's only a couple. So on there, my recommendation would be any of the Frank Sinatra stuff. There's a ton of it, but there's a bunch of AI-generated Frank Sinatra covers. And as I said, there's other companies out there, but but a lot of other companies will use things like television characters or movie characters. This specifically uses a musician, so that's why I'm focusing on this one. Listen to just a couple of Frank Sinatra songs that Frank Sinatra never sang. And I want to talk about this next week, because I think it's crazy that we're having all these conversations about film and television and the use of AI, and nobody seems to be pointing out that there has been a huge AI movement in the music scene that has been going on for months. People have been, years even, people have been generating AI versions of songs with other people singing them for a while now. And it is, it's not to be too spoilery, but it scares the poop out of me.
So just to make sure, that's AIONE Future?
Correct. All okay. One, and it's all one word, like gotcha. All lowercase, all one word, so no spaces.
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't the numeral, because that's what jumped into my mind to begin with.
I mean, their first link, we'll talk about this next week, but their first link in their description is a Fiverr link to pay them to do more of them. So like that's this is the thing that's here, people. And like, if we want to be able to talk about it at a time where we can't talk about movies and television, I think this is our next best option.
Yeah, cool. So that's it. So you want to look at AI One Future, all one word, on YouTube. And if you have the means, play some of the Dimension Shell Shocked DLC after it releases this Thursday, August 31st. Yeah, so I think that's it. Anything else you want to add, Sejohn, or we're all good? All right, perfect. So thank you for listening this far into it. If you have anything that you want to get in touch with us, the best way to do that is now sending us an email to thesayreport@gmail.com. Again, that's thesayreport, all one word, @gmail.com. And if it's for Sejohn or if it's for me, just make sure you put it in the subject. I'll make sure it gets to the person, that they're there, they can hear it, and then we can address it on the show. But until next time, William, I think it's time for you to bring us home. Have a great one, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.